have a really great guest with us here tonight. Someone that you're going to find is going to shed an enormous amount of light on what everybody, like in the last election, says was the most important set of issues they were concerned about: homelessness, drug addiction, and also what we see the consequences of for the city. With me here is Kevin Dahlgren. He's been on many different forums, Fox News a lot lately. Victoria Taft, a friend of mine, but many others. And also on Friday, I got to hear him present again in person. And well, let's launch right into it. Kevin, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me. I'm happy to be here.
So the thing that stood out to me the most when I got to hear you again, and I've gotten to hear you a number of different times. I know that I wanted people to get to know you. Back at Dorchester, we walked around and just introduced ourselves to all of the people that are in different positions of influence, knowing that they've got a learning curve to go up. But I thought on Friday there were a lot of things that kind of distilled down, encapsulated what you were saying. And one of the first things you said was, if you are benefiting from a system, why solve the problem the system's there to solve? And that just very clear, succinct descriptions of what is going on with the system. But why don't we start out a little bit, because some of the folks watching might not know you or your background. Tell a little bit about yourself and how you came to the point where you were saying this to a group of folks on Friday after the experiences you've had.
Well, yeah, background, of course, early, back in the day, I had no idea this is how, how dysfunctional the system really was. I entered the social service system the way I assume everybody does, is because they want to change the world. They want to make a difference. They want to serve the people and, fight for a cause that was important to them. And mine happened to be homelessness and addiction. And I started working professionally in social services in the early to middle 1990s. So definitely it's been almost 30 years now. And, back in the day, it was, first of all, a very manageable problem. Born and raised Portland, Oregon, the homeless problem in Portland was mostly concentrated in just a very specific neighborhood, which is Old Town Chinatown. So a lot of our energy was spent there. And then over the years, as I went to school and just kind of, gained more experience and stuff, I kind of moved up the ladder a bit and took on different positions. And what I started noticing was we weren't really solving the problem, because the homeless population slowly continued to grow. We are building more and more shelters, more and more of an infrastructure to help the homeless, but were we actually helping them? And so I started to really ask those questions, like, how is this benefiting them, and what's the long-term plan? What's the permanent solution? And this shift kind of happened. And really, I would say the shift was very noticeable about 8 or so years ago, where it became more about social justice rather than solving the problem. And so really, this whole idea of ending homelessness became more of a radicalized view on social justice rather than simply homeless person, home, combine the two or something,
Yeah, poof, solve.
And so basically they made it, they started, the people I worked with started to make homelessness a very political issue, and it being a very progressive political issue, such as the root cause of homelessness isn't trauma, addiction, or mental illness, it's capitalism. They would say things like that. I'm like, what the hell are you talking about? And they were justifying a lot of the behaviors on the streets, because if you are a victim of, say, capitalism and things like that, everything that happens on the streets isn't really your fault, because you're a victim of a much bigger issue. And I was really concerned with the direction we were going. And, working in social services was always very cult-like anyway, meaning you're not really supposed to have a strong opinion, and you're not really supposed to disagree. But then, 7, 8 years ago, that was then simply forbidden. You really are just like, stay in line, just do your job. But I'm like, well, our job isn't actually solving anything. And so I became more and more vocal. And, unfortunately, that kind of hurt my growth because the more I spoke up, the more I was getting, criticized and really doxxed for my opinions. And that was certainly very disappointing because I've always been a big believer in, we could end homelessness in months, not years, if we actually just all work together. But that's when I started noticing, this massive growth in homeless services. It went from a $1 million cause to a multi-billion dollar industry.
Yeah. A
And once this,
thousandfold, right? A
and
thousandfold is how it's growing.
yeah, I mean, and once this become an industry, there was really, I noticed from the people in charge, no real motivation to end it, except because their focus was, more housing, more services, more staff, right? So they always talked about how to grow the industry, but they never talked about how to decrease the homeless population, right? That was never a part of the conversation more. It was more about growth. And I'm thinking, I'm in social services. I didn't, I didn't go to school to enter a private industry where everything was about growth, right?
Right.
My goal was to work myself out of a job. That was my attitude. Like, we can work ourselves out of a job, and that wasn't happening. And that's kind of when I realized in some ways I was part of the problem because I worked in the system and it took me a long time to notice. And so I made that decision. I didn't want to be that person. So I didn't leave the system because I felt like I had a voice. I would just be very vocal about it. And that's when I started speaking up and speaking out. And of course, that went well in some ways and not so well in others because I definitely lost a lot of friends because I started criticizing this industry. And, I started criticizing the county and the cities and just like, why are we not doing our job? And I come from firsthand experience working over the last 30 years in all the types of the homeless service programs we have. I've worked, at the city, the county, the state, for profit, nonprofit, and faith based in each one for about 5 years. And so I have a strong understanding how dysfunctional the system is. And when people ask me, well, so what really is the problem? The problem is this: is nobody communicates. Nobody's in charge of anybody else. Everyone is just doing their own thing. I'm not saying there isn't good people legitimately trying, but the way the system is set up is that even if you make every effort, it's very, very hard to actually help anybody. And that's the problem.
Yeah,
And of course,
one of the words that stood out to me was the word accountability. It didn't seem like that was the system wasn't
no.
even designed for that to be possible. And then
And
your recent blog post on Substack, truthonthestreets.substack.com, you actually related some of this, what happened and the whole evolution of it. You talked about how in 2013 they were going to end it by 2023, end homelessness.
yep.
Which and then a ton of money started coming in, but it didn't seem like accountability and actually ending homelessness was the objective anymore.
And you know why there's no accountability is because the attitude is all homeless people are on the streets because of a capitalistic society. Therefore, we shouldn't hold them accountable because it's not their fault. And I'm not saying homelessness is everyone's fault. I am just saying it's a much more complex issue than just that. Like, that doesn't make any sense to me. 95% of the time, everybody on the streets has experienced childhood trauma. 80% of the time, they're actively using drugs. 75% of the time, they have a mental illness. You combine those three, yeah, this becomes a very complex adult, and we better have the resources available to help them. And we're not doing that. And so that's where we went wrong, is we politicized it. We made this a political issue, and it was not supposed to be. What we should have done is treated it like we would treat almost like any natural disaster. And I say this because anytime there's a natural disaster, say a major earthquake, what's the first thing that happens? The world comes together. The world works together, and everyone finds a way to solve it. But we don't do this with homelessness, even though it's in some ways a very similar crisis. but it's a crisis that's grown over time to the point where you just sort of become numb to it and you just walk over the person lying on the streets.
Yeah, that's
You
like
know,
a good example you give, by the way, of a natural disaster. You don't go into a natural disaster and say, let's see if we can have a disaster
yeah,
industry set up that will be there forever and the people will never recover from the disaster. We know everybody knows you're supposed to
yep.
recover from the disaster and get back to some state of
And
normal again, right?
so, and so with homelessness, we call this a crisis. But you know what? A crisis is supposed to end. A crisis can end and should end, but it hasn't. And another reason why is here's the dysfunctional system is that, I'll use this as just sort of an example. Say you're in a park and you hear a man screaming, you run to the lake and you see a man drowning. If you're the current homeless services system, you go home and you conduct a study of why the person's in the lake, right? That's what you do rather than say pulling them out before they drown. So my attitude is I don't care how this person ended up there. They either were pushed, they fell, or they jumped. But if you're the system, you're going to like, let's do a study, right? But I'm like, okay, first of all, can't we pull them out of the water first, solve the problem, and then revisit why they ended up in the lake? And I use it as an example. Well, now everything is about studies well, it's all about the studies. And I'm sorry, but like,
That goes with it.
just because something is complex doesn't mean it needs to be complicated. We can all see with our eyes a homeless person. I feel like we're capable of actually helping everybody, and it doesn't make any sense. And what we've really done way too long is we've relied too heavily on the social service system to fix it. And the fact is, they've shown that they can't, right? And a couple things need to happen. We need to start holding them accountable, not just the homeless, but we need to hold the system accountable. We need to expect metrics. We need to expect measurable results. And if you can't do it, we need to pay someone else, right? And that's just the way it is. It's not personal, but the fact is, unlike a business, this is humans are involved, which means people are dying. People are languishing and dying. These broken policies and this lack of effort is causing hundreds and hundreds of deaths a year. And so that's completely unacceptable. And there's so many families now who are home, not in social services, just like, oh my God, why aren't the people out there getting help? Why isn't my son, my daughter getting help, right?
Yeah.
And the fact is they're not getting help because the system doesn't even know really how to help them. They've just kind of turned everything around. They've just really made it political. And I've been kind of fighting against that. I'm very confident that we could end this crisis in months, not years, if we actually work together. And what I really wanted to say is, because I mentioned this as a crisis, I was talking to my colleague, Kate, in San Diego, and I kept saying, I did some outreach in San Diego 2 months ago, and I kept saying, this is a homeless crisis, crisis, crisis. And she was like, Kevin, this is no longer a crisis. This is malicious neglect. And I actually thought about that. I was like, wow, that's actually true. It used to be a crisis, but now it's just simply neglect, because we as a system always called it a crisis, but now 10, 20 years later, this is just simply neglect. Yeah. And that blew my mind when she said that. I still sometimes say crisis, but like that blew my mind when she, Kate Moreau from San Diego said that. And this is really what's happening is this is absolutely neglect.
That's good point. And I just remembering here that you wrote a column here, because I've posted already one of them, which is where you talk about this is why I call it the homeless industrial complex, and why people love housing first and hate all those who oppose it. So we've just talked about that. But then the other one you wrote was, we are loving the homeless to death. That's the malicious neglect, because you were pointing out there all these things that we're doing were just perpetuating the problem. And then you tried with one individual that you mentioned in this article to do something different, to try accountability, to do something that works, to stop being maliciously neglectful, and change it. And it worked. And now you kind of have turned this into, for want of a better term, not a brand, but something that you think actually is a system that someone can implement. And then it's a great story, isn't it? That you learned about the mayor of Gresham, and you sent him a letter. And this is when? What year was that?
September 2018 is when I wrote the letter. Never expecting the mayor to contact me, right? I mean, this is a mayor. And I wrote a very long letter about what was working, what wasn't, what they could do, where they've made bad decisions, where they made good decisions. I mean, I was brutally honest because I had nothing to lose and I wasn't looking for a job. I was just impressed because this particular mayor at the time had written a letter to all citizens saying there's nothing compassionate with allowing a person to live on the streets.
Yeah.
And it hit me like a bolt of lightning, like, wow. For the first time ever, I was like, wow, this is a mayor with courage. This is a mayor who actually thinks the way I do. So I sent a letter, long story short, City Hall contacted me about 2 weeks later and invited me to the city invited me to City Hall and said, we'd like you to talk to you. So I met with a group of senior managers and stuff. And a couple meetings later, after, again, not really
expecting
anything, I was so happy that they were listening.
Yeah.
I was just like, this is where you're great. This is where you suck, and they never kicked me out. So anyway, after the third meeting, they said, we want to offer you a job. We'd like to, get you involved and do exactly what you say you're going to do because you have sold it to us. And so I did that. So I joined the city 1 month later and I started October 2018. And while I could talk about this for 3 hours, how I did it. I will just jump ahead to 10 months later. We'd reduced homelessness by about 80%. And this is a city that borders Portland, Oregon, Vancouver, Washington, Fairview, Wood Village, and Troutdale. And a lot of homelessness, right? And we reduced it without a no camping policy because everyone said, oh, you just kicked them out. Well, actually we couldn't, right?
Yeah. The Boise decision, right?
Yeah, exactly. And that's fine. We had to take a different approach. And that approach was, I believe, and this is what I had told the mayor, is daily contact. We had to change our approach. We need to empower. We cannot enable. I basically said, sir, I just took everything I've learned in the last 20 years in social services, and I'm going to do the opposite.
Yeah.
And I mean, what can we lose, right? And he's like, all right, let's go for it. So I held him accountable. I gave him responsibility, and it was really amazing because they're all like, what? Okay. So we were getting him jobs, empowering him, making him self-sufficient. And it was just kind of really magical. It became this almost grassroots movement. Other people got involved. We hired more people. There was more volunteers, and the rest is history. Jump ahead a couple more years. We had completely restored the Springwater Corridor, which is 4.7 miles in Gresham. Every park, every sidewalk, everything. And there's this fundamental difference when you go into our city. We did this because we believed in the accountability piece, right? I believed strongly in restoring our city to what it once was. And I'm very, very proud of that. And what I say is that anybody is capable of this. I want to really quickly answer. I quickly glanced at a question.
Yeah.
Where someone asked, what do you do when a person refuses all help?
Yeah. I was thinking that's in right here.
The fact is that's going to happen. Mm-hmm. It's not like 100% of people be like, thank you, Kevin. Thank you for asking, right? There's always going to be that group that no matter how hard you try, every effort, they're just going to say no or F you, right? 1,000 times. That is when I believe for the greater good of the community, you simply have to enforce. For the greater good of the community, if the person refuses all help for the greater good, you simply do have to enforce. You do have to have a no camping policy. You don't want to go down that road, but you sometimes have to. The fact is, there's always going to be that group of people that want to live off the grid, but that doesn't work for most communities. And so that's where I believe in enforcement. But I don't want to blindly enforce. I also don't think some cities will just say, like, let's just kick everybody out. Well, that doesn't solve it either. a lot of people in the streets have trauma, addiction, mental illness. I had a little brother on the streets, right? I had family members on the streets,
That's
right?
why you
I have
got involved originally, right? Was your brother?
Yeah, I was inspired by that because I with other family members helped my beautiful little brother off the streets of Portland, Oregon, who at the time was living under a bush with a meth addiction. And how he ended up there was really kind of surprising to all of us because he was raised in the same household with me in the same room with the same family, and we're only 10 and a half months apart. So we're very close in age. I'm older. And I asked myself, like, how is it that when he was on the streets, I was in college, yet we're basically the same age with the same opportunities? The answer is because he handled a major life event differently than me, and that's the trauma. Every human in the world has experienced some kind of trauma, but we don't always handle it well. And that doesn't mean that one person's better than the other. It's just in some ways we just got lucky, you know?
Yeah.
Divorce can fundamentally affect a person, or other major events, or person to person crimes. It just sort of depends. And it just affected him differently. The good news is we empowered, my little brother, and he's thriving to this day. And actually, the day we helped him off the streets is his day to sobriety. And so
Wow.
that's something I have always remembered, as he was given every opportunity. And because of that, he's now thriving and doing great. And so I do believe that sort of really inspired me many years ago to stay in this field, because I believe the empowerment piece is something we need to apply to all homeless, and something we're absolutely not doing.
Well, and one thing that really struck me about the things that you described is that um, in the overwhelming number of cases, people actually are interested in help. They kind of feel like they're trapped or they're stuck, and they, in a way, crave a bit, some structure, and even some pushback, uh, which when you described how that worked and how often it could work for people, and then of course you went and you employed these methods in Gresham, this is empathy, but it's not just giving in to the behaviors. It's the opposite, which
Mm-hmm.
I think what's really concerning about the things that are going on that you also have described in some detail: bodily autonomy, harm reduction, going around and actually doing ads where you tell people to go do drugs with friends for safety reasons. And it it has perpetuated something that you described last Friday when I got to take notes and really take it in. Is that's fostering a dependency, and it's the opposite of self-sufficiency, which requires the tougher love.
Yeah.
That blew me away, because that means that when people say, well, I'm just tired of homelessness, let's just get them out of here. Well, actually, that's not going to just make them evaporate, and it's not even empathetic, right? But on the other hand, telling people do whatever you want, that is uh, cruel.
Well, not only is it cruel because of their social justice beliefs, when you make a person dependent on a system, that system thrives.
Not the
You
person,
know,
but the system.
no, the system. I say the system, not the person. The people are dying. And what we have now is you know, a large percentage of the homeless population that went from wanting help to now, or sorry, wanting the service to needing it. Meaning, here's that sandwich, and here's another blanket, and here's another tent. Not here's another job, here's another opportunity to get clean. It's always the things that keep them comfortable on the streets,
Yeah,
right?
you
And
talked about this a number of times. You're like, the percentage of people you've gone and talked to in recent years, and you've asked them if they've ever been approached by someone, an outreach counselor, that told them, "I want to get you off the streets today," and the percentage is profoundly low.
and this is everywhere. I've done extensive outreach in major cities throughout the West Coast, and it's very, very common to hear you're the first person to ever talk to me. And in Portland, Oregon specifically, because that's my hometown, you know, I've interviewed now hundreds of homeless the last 2 years. and posted them, as you know, on my, social media, primarily Twitter. And 95% have told me you're the first outreach worker to ever approach me, ever. And you know what's insane about that is that's the first step. That is the first step to ending this crisis.
You can't go to step
Because
10. You have to start there, right?
well, the system is always step 10, which is let's build more housing. But if they understood the homeless, they would know that the fact is more than half the homeless would never even accept that type of housing. Like you could hand them that golden key, they're like, nah, I'm good. So then why are we building it? Why not make them self-sufficient? Why not then give them the skills to get off the streets and give them the job opportunities and get them clean? Because if you help a person reach their fullest potential, maybe we don't need to have that affordable housing argument because they're not interested in affordable housing. But that's another narrow view of looking at a homeless person as simply a victim where we have to take care of them. And that's disappointing, because if you actually went out there and talked to the homeless, you would find a lot of them that aren't interested in that kind of things. They think it's completely insane that the money is spent on something that they know they will never accept. Of course, eventually all those rooms are going to get filled by somebody, but not the chronically homeless, not the ones that we see every day. It's the new homeless, you know? So we just kind of have to rethink everything. And that's why I say outreach by far is the first important step, because in the outreach is where you build rapport, you build trust, and you bring back hope. And that's really three important pieces before you could ever think about anything else. And of course, I know that certain people will always need that type of housing because of the mental health issues and the chemical dependency and whatever, but it's not 100%. It's less than half, right? And, I've always said this, to solve a problem, you have to understand a problem. And most people don't understand homelessness because they don't go out there and actually talk to the homeless. What they do instead is they read 10 books on homelessness and then sit around in their office and be like, let's create policy. I mean, name a politician who's actually been out there and spent significant amount of time doing this. It's very, very uncommon, and I don't expect like politicians to just like drop everything and do this, but they're also counting on their policy advisors or somebody, a professional, to be like, this is the truth. But again, the problem is that everything's so politicized that even these policy advisors will whisper in the ears of the electeds, this is what's going on, when it's actually not true.
Yeah, I noticed on your website, you've got a new website. I just posted a link to it. And if you go to the problem, click on the problem, 80% of street homeless are addicted to fentanyl. 90% of homeless have never been approached by an outreach worker. 65% of homeless in progressive cities come from other states.
It's around 65, probably a little bit higher. Progressive cities do attract homeless because it's the progressive cities that have made homelessness political and made it about social justice. And I've done extensive outreach in Seattle, Portland, San Francisco, other cities in California, even Hawaii, that I was invited to from the governor a year and a half ago to assess his homeless situation, Governor Josh Green, and that was really rewarding. So what I'm saying is that there's a lot of progressive cities, and I don't think as Hawaii is progressive. I'm just saying that was the West Coast city I was at. But that is a problem, is that these cities, and I mean, if you really look at a map and you see where the most concentrated areas of homeless, it's always going to be with the cities with the most social justice, right? The homeless come there because guess why? The decriminalization of drugs. It's easy to camp. There's abundant social services. But the problem is there's more homeless than social services. So then the wait lists are years and years long. And the fact is that why these cities and states don't push back on the inflow is the inflow to them is, that's just simply more money.
Yeah, you need more homeless industrial complex, right?
Yeah, every homeless person really has dollar signs on their head. I challenge anyone to approach a homeless person. I guarantee you they're going to name 5 professionals that they at least heard of or used to work with or know. And if you actually do your research and find out who these professionals work with, you're going to find that it's basically all the same all the different agencies basically doing the same thing.
Yeah. Well, and
I
there
mean,
was something else that was interesting, because when we were talking earlier on about what this anti-capitalist thing in your article describing what happened in 2013, you were told that, like, they brought people in, right, who started telling everybody kind of who to vote for and what to believe and what the real reason why there was homelessness, which is it was capitalism.
oh yeah.
And then they started making people pretty afraid that if you want to do this stuff and help people, then you better not, like, start saying what you think. You got to just repeat what we just told you. And that changed things. That seems to have accompanied the very
Yep.
trends that we've seen. And this bodily autonomy thing literally tells people that all these things, using drugs, being homeless, living on the streets, and committing crime, it's not your fault. It's capitalism's fault. So we can't fix this until capitalism is overthrown, which is just
And
nuts.
therefore the behavior is justified.
Yeah.
Because if you are a victim capitalist society, all behaviors on the street are justified. I've talked to professionals that even say they're on occasion person-to-person crimes are justified because it wasn't their fault. So like sexual assaults and burglars and stuff are like, well, they're committing this because they're a victim. And they've really kind of downplayed everything. But yeah, back to 2013, there was a very, very coordinated effort to get everyone in line because they needed this push. And it was a multi-billion-dollar windfall because they managed to convince President Obama in 2013 to federally mandate housing first, to make it a housing first policy. And you know what? I don't necessarily blame Obama because, again, as I said, with any elected official, especially a president, they count on their advisors.
Yeah.
But they lobbied hard at the federal level and convinced him that housing first was going to save everything. And this is when he said, in 10 years, we're going to end homelessness, which is, by the way, today. How are we doing, sir? Not so well.
Yeah.
So now I've gone through 3 10-year plans on homelessness. And it's getting really old. I'm just like, come on.
Getting far worse, right? That was the other thing.
I mean,
I found it really interesting what you described in this story. You said that they, at first, when it was somewhat more manageable, and they built special housing, like almost like apartment complexes for homeless to go and reside. Outside of it, people didn't know what was going on in the inside, which is it was just hiding the problem. You described drug use, fights, assaults, despair, and death on the inside of the places where you were working.
Yeah, these are beautiful buildings. These are beautiful buildings, but you go inside, because these are harm reduction buildings, it's just rampant drug use and assaults, and it's just terrifying. And it's so sad because there's so many homeless too that really want help that got sent to these places that are trying to stay clean. It's basically, it's almost impossible. They're being victimized and assaulted, and it's like having an alcoholic have to live in the back room of a bar. It's like, honestly, come on. Sometimes it has to be out of sight, out of mind. You have to have clean facilities, but they don't believe in that for the most part. They believe, well, a person has a right to use because that's harm reduction. And I completely disagree. And by the way, if anyone asks, especially my naysayers, I'm a drug and alcohol counselor, and I have a strong, extensive history counseling people with addiction issues. And I don't believe in harm reduction. I think it's actually done more harm than good. It's all harm or no reduction is what it is.
Yeah.
And especially since what we were talking about is this sort of harm reduction marketing that's basically says drug use is empowering, use with friends, and why don't you try something different? Not different like, I don't know, another healthier hobby like, jogging. Yeah. They will say, try something different. Instead of fentanyl today, why don't you try meth? So they will suggest, like,
switch it up.
And yes, meth is not as severe as fentanyl, but it's still a bad drug. Yeah. Why can't you talk about something more positive, like, anything that's not drug related? And so they're very, it's hard. It's impossible not to say that they're not really pro drug use for people, because that's the part of bodily autonomy, the social justice movement, is that we, according to them, do not have a right to question what another person does with their body.
Well, and plus they're victims, so they can kind of they're doing things and we can't hold them accountable for it, which is the other side of it. Because I actually would argue that the reason why people are super concerned about homelessness in Portland now, it outgrew those buildings that were being built, and now it's all over the streets. And the crime that has resulted of it has dramatically affected, and sort of the rundown, dangerous areas of the city, businesses leaving because they just don't think this is actually good for business. Which is, common sense. But then I'm just wondering, now that it's grown so big, the term crisis has only been applied once people couldn't really turn anywhere without seeing it. Why aren't they taking more time to figure out what it is that you were doing that was working? And I'm also thinking about another example of where not just Gresham, but the one you talked about that you worked on with the folks in the Pearl District that made progress, and then boom, it got blown up. And it wasn't blown up by homeless people. It was someone else.
Yeah. I have a proven model, not a working model, but a proven model. And we've done this all over. And it's not just me. There's other people doing similar work. Is that, this very proactive daily contact empowerment sort of approach is extremely effective. So even though this crisis feels very unmanageable, this is the best time ever to actually finally once and for all do something. And it's certainly frustrating with my experience where I've seen firsthand the successes, why the system continues to ignore it. I want to say I'm cautiously optimistic. The city, let's just say the city of Portland has been saying the right things. And even the county now has what I like to say is two good county commissioners. Sharon Myron, for one, is someone I madly respect, right? And the new one too, I really like her. I've met her.
Julie
and
Edwards.
Yeah. And I've never personally met JVP, but I'm going to say I'm cautiously optimistic she's going to come around. I will also say is I don't miss Deborah Kafori. She was a complete nightmare. And, under her watch, hundreds of people died because of her lack of policy, hundreds at least. And shame on her for with the enormous power she wielded to actually make a difference. I mean, a county chair has significantly more power than even a mayor of a major city.
That's right.
A county chair, people don't realize that, but she oversaw billions of dollars. And if she listened to the right people, and so I'm very disappointed in her, and it's just sad. But what I'm saying is that
governors have a lot of power, but when it comes to local implementation, county chairs are where it's at, right?
It's where it's at, yeah. But Sharon is amazing, and Julie Bren, and so I am cautiously optimistic. Mayor Wheeler has been saying the right things. We have Renee Gonzalez, we have Nikas Maps.
Yeah.
This is just me talking locally. Everything we're saying here really affects everything. This is homelessness throughout the U.S. And I've traveled all over.
People sometimes in Portland with what we're doing, right? Just a little.
Yeah, and when people ask me, I honestly would say Portland is about a year ahead of a lot of cities that are more progressive. I actually think we're slowly coming around, and I think a lot of it is because people like you and people like me and others have been so vocal. People like Angela from PDX Real, Angela and Jeff.
Yep, Angela.
Angela Todd. They're this voice of reason, and the fact is, people are starting to listen, and that makes me, cautiously optimistic, and certainly makes me feel hope again.
Do you think? Well, I wondered if I think I asked you on Friday. Have any academicians, people who study homelessness, contacted you? And you told a story. You said, yeah, they've contacted you, but not to find out what you're doing that's working, so that they could do a paper or a study on it, but actually for a different reason. And one actually had some unkind words for you.
Yeah, that was sad. Just the academics in charge, that's why I'm not a big fan of just the academics, because first of all, I don't care if you have a PhD from the classroom. I'd rather you have a PhD of street homeless outreach. You know, show me, prove to me that you've been out there for 5 years and made a genuine effort to understand these people, right? Because if you haven't, then why are you writing about it? You know, it's like a person who wrote a book on a bicycle who's never ridden a bicycle, you know? And so they'll be able to describe it perfectly, except how to write it or what it looks like or the feeling you get when you're on a bike, you know? It's just like they just don't understand homelessness. So yeah, let's just say a major
Major
I don't want
university dean of
I'm just
social work, right?
I'm just going to say a major university dean of social work in the West Coast of the United States. I had a Zoom with, and I thought it went okay, you know. And this is a person who's in charge of again social workers going
Training
into
them.
the field to
Yeah.
do what I'm doing, basically. And after our Zoom, I got an email from this individual 2 days later that said, "I don't think we can work together. You're a racist." I'm like, what? I'm like, where did it come from? I'm like, are you crazy, lady? And what it was something I failed to notice was on her website. She had a strict rule, and the rule was this: you have to announce verbally all Black Lives Matter. And if you don't say that before any meeting, regardless what the subject matter of the meeting, uh, that makes me a
All right.
privileged white male racist. And I'm like, God, what is wrong with you, lady? First of all, we were talking about homelessness. We were talking about addiction. We weren't talking about race. And honestly, I wouldn't have said that anyway because this has nothing to do with the subject, right? So I'm not going to play into this little game of yours, right? And of course, that's her. And by the way, in this meeting, she said, "I am proud that of my activist, anarchist students. I am proud they are burning our cities down because this is a revolution." She called it a revolution. She is proud. She is proud that we're burning buildings down. She said, "I'm encouraging this." So you want to talk about the root causes? The root causes might very be the people who are being trained, and that's at the university level. Not all the universities, but certainly more of these, you know, liberal ones.
Well, that means we got a lot of work to do here to make people aware of it. And I think you said that there are people paying attention. The problem's gotten so bad that they're starting to turn a corner here. Everything you talked about really is kind of common sense. Like if you want to help somebody, you need to talk to them. Could you just
Mm-hmm.
briefly take us through what it's like to go talk to someone that's different than what's generally being done? Because we know we're paying for a lot of people to do something that's not working. What does it look like when you go up to someone for the first time, like you did in Gresham, and
Well,
you change?
okay. Well, first of all, in most major cities, for the outreach teams that do exist, the rule is you're not allowed to be. You have to stay within 20 feet from them. You have to keep 20 feet away. So how are you supposed to engage in a meaningful conversation from 20 feet away? That's very difficult. So, you know, a lot of the approach is treating the person like an adult and not treating them like a homeless person, you know? And I mean that I know it sounds like simple, but it's like, look, when and I'm traveling right now in California, and what I'm saying is that when you approach a homeless person, it's just simply like approaching them like you would any other adult or like a neighbor, and simply say, "Hey, how's it going?" So there's no weirdness. There's no "you're a victim" and "oh my gosh, I'm so sorry for you." But it's more like getting to know them, build that rapport, and you know what if you do have services to offer, rather than tiptoeing around it, just simply say, "Hey, I have, I'm here to help. How can we do it? Let's figure this out now." Right? I don't beat around the bush. I get right to the point, and I don't just say, "I'm going to give you a sandwich and a tarp and a tent," because I will tell them that's not going to solve anything. I will say this to them, okay? And you know what I want to do is I want to find you a job. I want to get you housing. I want to make you self-sufficient. You know, what did you do? What did you do before you were homeless? You know, what was it that drove you? You know, like there was something beyond the addiction, if that's what's going on with them, that's the reason you woke up in the morning. And I swear to you, 9 times out of 10, they're like, "I miss my family. I miss my art. I miss something." It's always something that's not drugs. And that's what you got to do is you got to find that hook. You got to find that one thing. You got to replace that drug use with something of equal intensity that isn't drugs. And I'm only saying this, for example, of the 80+% that are using, because that's a very high percentage.
Yeah.
Sometimes the homeless are on the streets because of a bad situation. I got a divorce, I have a medical issue, stuff like that. That to me is completely insane why they're still on the streets. That's low-hanging fruit. Those are the easiest possible people to get off the streets, and what they're doing there makes no sense, right? The people with addiction, mental illness, that takes work, not the ones that are there for more external type stressors. They're sober, they're motivated, but they have no hope. They're like, I don't know how I ended up here, but no one's talking to me. So really, approaching a homeless person, you never know what you're going to get, because these are at times very complex people. But what they never expect is if you have the courage to approach them, shake their hand, and talk to them like a real person, because they're not used to it. They're used to being treated like a victim, or they're used to just like stupid resources like, I brought you a granola bar, have a good day. They're like, what the hell, right?
Yeah.
They want to talk to you like a real person. And why they love being interviewed is because I'm giving them a voice. And I've been criticized that I'm exploiting the homeless by interviewing. I'm like, well, actually, they love being interviewed and they always give me permission. It's not like I'm running towards them with a camera, right? Right. Only on rare occasions, if it's a serious thing where I have to show this is a mental health crisis, it's going unignored, I might film it. But 95% of the time, it's me getting consent for the person to talk about their issues, and they like it because it's the first time that they've ever had a voice.
Somebody's paying attention to them, and actually a lot of other people get to see it, right?
And when people say, well, so I've been told, hey, Kevin, you're helping move this needle. I says, well, I would say that homeless are doing this because of their powerful interviews, because it's the interviews that people can't stop talking about. It's not me, because I used to be very vocal without doing the interviews, and I would get things like, Kevin's lying. That's not possible. There's no way there's that many addicts on the streets. Kevin's lying. I'm like, all right. That's true. I can't convince people. When you can't always prove to a person you're not lying. So I went to the homeless and said, hey, by the way, you need to share with me what's going on, because they don't believe me. And once I started doing that, it really kind of changed everything. Of course, the new narrative is, because there's been too much truth telling, the new narrative I've been hearing from some of the activists is Kevin hires actors to play homeless people. I'm like, if that's the case, it would have to be their last acting gig ever, and somehow I'd have enough money to hire all the extras in the background in this major homeless encampment. The dumbest thing I've ever heard. They're like, oh, I recognize them. They're an actor. I'm just like, that's how desperate they are, because that truth telling counters their narrative, and it's very difficult, I guess, for them to hear something that goes against what their narrative is. And that's another important piece to doing outreach, is you have to be open-minded to accept the fact that you might hear something that counters something that you believe in deeply, and that is key. And so I have to always remain very open-minded, that I may hear something that I may personally disagree with, but I still need to post, because this shouldn't be about me,
Yeah. Authenticity is important. And I'm looking right now at one of your pinned tweets that you just did, announcing you're on Substack and talking about your recent writings. And it's a picture of a woman that you described in last Friday as she had been sexually assaulted, right?
Yep.
And the look in her face says everything.
That was a powerful photo. I sat with her. And, this is why I'm filming these women, interviewing them, is because that's one thing I heard too, is, Kevin, sexual assaults are not happening on the streets. That's a lie. And I was hearing this from the elected officials. And the fact is, almost every female in the streets is virtually guaranteed to be sexually assaulted. It's never if, it's when.
When.
It's always going to be when. And it's very, very, very common. And the truth hurts, and it's brutal, but people need to hear it. Women and men are being victimized every single day on the streets, and will continue to be victimized until we do something about it. And that is why I care so deeply about what I do. And what drives me is that this is affecting people's lives. the fact is there's a small group of homeless that are victimizing the hell out of the other homeless right now.
Yep.
You know, uh, and so that's why I'm just very driven to share as much as I can with people, to join movements or donate to causes of the right people that are involved in fixated on ending this crisis.
Well, and I think this is a good moment to mention that there's a way people can support your work. If they go to truthonthestreets.org/support, as you mentioned, you left the previous job. What was it? A couple of years you weren't even allowed to talk to the media in order to keep doing the job
Yeah,
you're doing. And
I,
then
I was censored. I was censored from the county because I was being too truthful, and so I kind of made the not difficult decision. It was bold to not accept a job right now because I'm getting more done now than I ever have in my entire, career, I guess. And I have a voice now. And fortunately, people are really listening. And so it feels very liberating to finally share this. And the fact is, the needle is moving. So I did start that website to help kind of support my work, to allow me to continue to do outreach, to travel. Because the fact is, I'm not, working, and I'm happy with that because I'm 52 and I've been working since I was 14 years old, and so it's kind of a nice break. But not working, like I'm out there basically 12 hours a day. The only reason I'm home now is to do this. But from at 6:30 a.m. this morning, I was in one of the largest encampments in California, and I've been there all day long, and so and did some great work. But what I'm saying is that's kind of an example of like, I care so deeply about this. For me, it's not like 8 hours a day. It's like I wish it was 8 hours a day. It's like 7 days a week, 12 hours a day, because I care about this. So, but yeah.
Go ahead.
Well, and so like you said, I have my website, my Twitter, which I think most people follow, and of course my Substack, which is a place where I've been writing. Not as much as I should. I try to find time, but I enjoy doing it. I wanted to answer this quick question from Lori because I appreciate her question.
I was going to ask you about that.
Is should you prosecute the homeless who break the law? Yes.
Yeah, it's accountability, right?
And look, shoplifting, I don't really care about. That's such a minor issue, but there's needs to be law and order, right? And I'm not out to like criminalize, I'm not, my goal is to get a person off the streets. I'm well aware that being homeless in the streets, it's virtually guaranteed. You almost have no choice but to break the law, right? You just do. You're going to use drugs, you're going to trespass, littering, all that stuff, right? And, I don't necessarily want them to be prosecuted for that, especially if they're motivated to get off the streets. But for the serious crimes, hell yeah, of course. But not the minor stuff. The minor stuff, I think we need to kind of take a pass and be like, look, if this person is serious about getting off the streets, I would rather help them in that way than just going down the prosecuting road. You know what I mean? I think you got to find that little balance. So
and Measure 110, I mean, things took off like crazy when that was put into place. That was essentially the decriminalization of all of our drugs. What did it do?
It's one of the worst things we could have ever done. And this was all social justice. Okay. Don't be fooled. You were lied to that this was more about getting people treatment rather than sending them to jail. I call BS. This is social justice. This was simply this was a veiled attempt to give a person bodily autonomy, the right to use. This was nothing more than social justice, and they fooled us. And you know what? It worked. But guess what? We have a record number of overdoses and deaths. So how is that working? And when I talk about this, I get emotional because I've personally witnessed multiple people die on the streets of Portland, Oregon, really in Oregon, because of this measure. And it really pisses me off that people continue to blindly support it. Like somehow this is a good thing. And put yourself into the shoes of a homeless person who's an addict. They lack rational thought and critical thinking, but now you've given them a free pass to use as much as they want, wherever they want. What do you think's going to happen? Right?
Yeah.
I mean, these are people that desperately need structure and they're not getting it. I've seen so many overdoses and deaths, and it is really hard to watch. I saved a person a couple days ago from ODing in Portland, Oregon by Narcaning them 3 times, right? And that's very common. But what I'm saying is that like these are people that are in desperate need of structure, not more of a like, you go girl, you keep using, I'm so proud of you. You know? I mean, that's what they do because the literally you see the posters of harm reduction where everyone's smiling saying, we love you, keep using. And for a person who lost all their family estrangement, and has lost all hope, that to them is hope. The hope is the smiling and the love. And that's what's confusing to this person. So they continue to use and they get patted on the back for doing it. I mean, there's other harm reduction posters. Well, there's a person like nodded out, like clearly miserable. And there's 4 people standing around him smiling, rooting him on, keep using, keep using, keep using, as if it's a good thing. I mean, it's pathetic. And when I say these things, I get harassed online saying, how dare you? You hate all addicts and you hate the homeless. I'm like, hate? Wouldn't that mean I love them?
Yeah. Yeah, I know.
I mean,
it's the opposite. Yeah.
And shame on them. Shame on them for even saying that. I mean, it pisses me off. I mean, can't we agree that we should not like be encouraging drug use of fentanyl, which is the deadliest drug really in history, 50 times stronger than heroin and cheaper, and it's killing people left and right. So yeah, Measure 110 needs to be repealed.
Yeah. And I think the complement to it is to implement the things you're talking about. The most powerful thing I saw in the videos you did, and I know I probably haven't watched enough of them to find, I'm sure there's something more powerful, but there was a kid that you were talking to. It was late at night and he was like, I think 23 years old, almost unable to converse. But
Yep.
you said to him, I want to get you off the streets today and into a shelter. Will you do it? And to think that people that were spending billions of dollars and people are not actually saying that to someone, and they're even doing the opposite, is just unbelievable. But it was so powerful to see you say that, because I think that almost captures in one sentence what we could be doing left and right
Yep.
all day long.
We should offer those immediate services, and we should then find a way to do it. Because the fact is, I don't know if you know this, but most housing programs are usually 50 to 60% capacity. There's almost always open beds because of the lack of coordination. And it's we've all been lied to that we don't have enough housing. I'd say right now, if we were to identify every homeless person who actually wants housing, get them in, and get them in the housing, we would see this significant dent in homelessness. Yes, there's not enough for everybody, but guess what? Not everybody wants housing. But right now, there's empty beds right now sitting there because the staff aren't doing their job. And a part of it is a staffing issue, but like this is why I'm very critical, and this is why I get a lot of hate, is because I'm criticizing the very people I used to work for.
Yeah.
But like treat it like the what crisis it is, because this is pissing me off. Because people are dying. Someone has to be that voice. Someone has to be pissed off enough to say it. Rather than this clocking in and out BS, treat this like a cause. Treat this not like a job, but a cause. And also have the attitude, which I told my mayor the day I started when he says, Kevin, what's your plan? And I thought for a moment, I was about to go into this long detail. I'm going to do this, this, and this, and this. And I just kind of summarized. I said, you know what, sir, my plan is to work myself out of a job. That was it. I could have gone, but I said, and that's what I believed in. I said, you know what? I'm going to fix it and I'm going to move on. And that's what happened. And that should be the attitude of anybody that works in homeless services, right? Is work myself out of a job. That is the attitude.
That's victory.
And that should be the only attitude, honestly, when you're hiring someone in homeless services, not mental illness or chemical dependency, because that's needed. Now, of course, it's not like everybody would then lose their jobs. Like say we ended homelessness tomorrow. What's the next logical step? The next logical step is this. We pivot to retention and prevention. That means everyone off the streets, keep them off the streets. And the prevention, let's work with people at risk of going to the streets and making sure it never happens again. That's where we'll use you. So don't worry, folks. You're not going to be unemployed. You just have to pivot to something than what you're doing now.
Yeah. Well, that is a great point to end on here, because I think we actually covered literally everything that you talked about on Friday, and I'm surprised we got it within the confines of an hour. But this is what people need. This is what policymakers need to hear. Everybody who's watching this show, you guys need to pressure our policymakers to listen to this and take it seriously, because we want it solved. We don't want it administrated and enabled. We want people to feel self-sufficient so they can get off the streets forever and they can become productive members of society. And this is what you described to us today. So we have no excuses now. But it's great that you're out there saying these things, even saying it to people who, may not want to hear it.
And I appreciate it, Kevin. And I just want to ask this to the people watching. It would really help if you just shared with people, my website, my Substack, because the more people that are involved, the faster we can get this done. And so that's just a personal favor, is share with everybody if they're interested in this, because I am very, very much driven to end this crisis, and the more support I have, the better. So thank you.
Truthonthestreets.org and twitter.com/Kevin Dahlgren. I've posted it here in the feed. Please start following this, start sharing it with everyone you can. Thank you again, Kevin, for joining us here today. Really appreciate the time, and we'll be following what you're doing as it goes forward here, and hoping and praying for you too. A lot of folks out there doing that.
I appreciate that, brother.
All right. Take care, Kevin. And we'll see everyone on the next episode of The Captive Audience. We'll be back tomorrow night with more.